Welcome to the panel where we look at the world through the frame of the comic book. My name is Jason Vidal. Quick warning, massive spoilers for Deadpool and Wolverine.
Are you ready?
In Deadpool and Wolverine, we got the worst Wolverine, but I actually believe he is the best Wolverine. But I think we also got the best cinematic Deadpool. Now, I think that the first Deadpool movie is absolutely brilliant. The second wasn't as groundbreaking for me, but it ticked all the boxes. The great irony is, everything in these films is amazing, except for Deadpool. First off, it should be said that my other big problem is I find Deadpool incredibly annoying, but that's my own personal crucified Wolverine to bear. Wolverine pretty much summed up my take on Deadpool from the first two movies.
I have never met a sadder, more attention-starved, jabbering little prick in my entire life.
You couldn't pay me to go back and watch those first two films. Why? Because I think he's cruel and viciously mean in a way that I just can't stand to watch. No, I don't mind when Deadpool's tearing verbal strips off the bad guys.
You're about to be killed by his voting.
So you start with violence and you hurt people. Some wanton verbal cruelty is completely justified.
I've never said this, but don't swallow.
Now, we both know another guy who wears red and insults the bad guys.
You're that Spider guy on YouTube, right? Call me Spider-Man!
I got to work on 1 or 3 of his films, but Spidey does it tactically, to throw his enemies off their game by irritating them.
Oops, guess we're stuck in here for a while. Want to play 20 questions? No? How about we thumb wrestle? Okay, face punch it is.
And despite being a professional comic book artist and writer, I'm not talking about whether these adaptations are comic book accurate. I've only read maybe 40 or 50 Deadpool comics. I'm absolutely not an authority here. But every comic book I read with Deadpool, from Nicienza and Liefeld on, I always remembered him being more often than not charming and goofy with a whiff of Spider-Man levels of mean to the bad guys. But you know what Spider-Man doesn't do? He's not cruel to innocent people. You know, like calling a cab and knowing you can't pay.
$27.50.
I never carry a wallet while I'm working.
I get Deadpool's not a hero, but this is several levels below not cool. Dopender's driving a cab to make ends meet. He's not racing cars in Monaco. He can't afford a free ride, and he can't afford to fight you on it. So your next plan is to break into a random innocent person's apartment to lure your actual target too, but then you beat him, tease him, abuse him, and...
Then whose kitty litter did I just get in?
You do any of this, you're not only off my Christmas card list, I'm blocking you on my phone, every social media platform, and if you send any ravens to my castle, I'm keeping them. What's the reason for doing this to that guy? Structurally, it's to mislead us, the audience, so Wade can be funny. But this choice is a double-edged sword. When you look past the funny, he's just being cruel for no reason at all, which makes Wade overall a lot less funny for me. I get he's helping a girl with the stalker, and Deadpool giveth, but in this case, he also taketh a lot of reasons for me to like him. Now, the second movie is not as vicious. He's also grieving hard, so I can forgive him a lot. He runs his mouth about Russell.
I don't give a about him and his Are You My Mother complex.
And then spends the entire movie making up for it. I can respect that. In the second movie too, his interactions with innocent non-bad guy randos involve more laughing at Deadpool's delusions than anything else.
The X-Men dated metaphor for racism in the 60s, so respect.
But let's talk about Deadpool's friends and how he treats them. Now, I get Blind Al's
Old, but she's feisty.
She can take a verbal beating,
and she also dishes it right back to him as well.
You can come at that lady.
Fist raised? You're looking for an arrow in the knee.
But the blind jokes? Making fun of blind people? Red card, timeout, and that's all I saw when I watched those first two movies. A bully being needlessly cruel to the people around him. Now, maybe I'm overly sensitive to this, because I hate bullies.
Can't you just stuff it down, turn it into accomplishment or cancer like the rest of us?
This is my irrationality. I see it, I just go total Bruce Banner. And that's why I hated Deadpool. I felt in these two films, he was a bully. I know Wade has been through a rough time over the last two movies. He's gone through more than I ever have and hope I ever have to. But understanding that still doesn't make Deadpool somebody that I want to be around or even just watch in a movie. Even if Colossus, who is my favorite X-Man, won't give up on him. I'm sorry, Peter, but please don't invite Wade when we're hanging out. But then, Deadpool and Wolverine. His dark humor is, as Ryan Reynolds, co-writer, producer, and star of the Deadpool movies, calls.
Oh, his maladaptive coping mechanism.
And despite hanging a lampshade on all my issues with the previous movies, I don't actually think it sums up Wade for me in this movie. I think they dialed him down from an I'm trying too hard 11 down to a pretty solid 8. Then the way that Wade was flailing with his midlife crisis changed my perception of him. Him slipping on the downward spiral of depression and acceptance.
I'm fine with being done.
turned his maladaptive coping mechanism on himself. He became the butt of his own vicious jokes.
No, I live in a one-bedroom apartment. Share a bed with Blind Al.
Made me really feel for him. Seeing Deadpool being the butt of everyone else's jokes.
Everybody knows.
Gave us something in common. Seeing his genuine love for the things that I love made me feel like he was one of my friends. His previous unbearable narcissism became just a hilarious delusion.
I am Marvel Jesus.
Because I'm hilariously deluded too. I irrationally love comic books. By Oneg the Prober, suddenly Wade and I had a lot in common. Did I actually like Deadpool in this movie? Wow, that's cool. Now, my kids have been begging me to watch Deadpool and Wolverine. Okay, full disclosure, I really want to show them Deadpool and Wolverine. But as you know, there was a ton of homework to be done. They'd seen everything else before, except for Fantastic Four. Screw that mediocrity. So over the last few days, I bit the bullet and I showed them Deadpool 1 and Deadpool 2. Don't worry, eyes were closed for several scenes.
Pegging isn't new for me, friendo, but it is for Disney.
And they know that just like driving a car, bad language is something only the adults do. They break that rule, they don't get cool movies. I don't recommend you do this with your kids, but I know my kids and I know that they can handle it. I'll be honest, going into it, I've seen these movies multiple times. I've overanalyzed them extensively. Deadpool 2 coming up next, I promise. This prospect of sitting through 3 hours and 48 more excruciating minutes of Deadpool's company didn't exactly elicit a thrill in me. But parents have to make sacrifices.
Kids, they give us a chance to be better than we are.
And then the craziest thing happened. I had a great time. I enjoyed both these movies more than I ever have. What was going on? And second, I think I genuinely liked Deadpool in both movies, despite the bullying, despite the cruelty. What? How?
Why is Gamora?
And I've been racking my brains like Henry Cavill's arms trying to think of why. And here's my theory. Finally seeing a movie that made me like Wade, allow me to go back and watch these earlier movies, is things that I can now put in Deadpool's past, because that's not who he is now. I can forgive what he's done in these first 2 movies because he changes. I genuinely think he's a better person. Maybe not to these random TVA agents, but definitely to his friends and innocent random people. There's a lot of amazing tricks that this movie pulled, but its greatest trick was finally making me like Deadpool. You were right, Peter.
This is what friends do. They show up. Not when convenient or easy. When hard.
You never gave up on your friend. Bring Wade around the next time we hang and I'll buy the Faggy's Famous. Gluten-free.
I have a gluten sensitivity, so one glass of wine, I just...
Speaking of hanging, if you look at the runtime, we are far from done. If you've got a second of your precious time to fuel our healing factors with the tap of that like button, that'd mean the absolute world to me and my 1-year-old anniversary channel. To all the new subscribers from my Wolverine video, my God, thank you so much and welcome. I'm genuinely overwhelmed by you all. It is so great to have you. If you want to join the Scott and Jay's Not So Cinematic Universe train, just hit that subscribe button. We would love to have you and keep continuing these conversations. Seriously, we are just getting started. But hold your horses, this is the 4th episode of our Deadpool and Wolverine breakdown. Don't worry, you don't have to watch them in order. You know the movie, just go back and watch the other videos for the parts you like. Today, we are going to cover our favorite mid and end credit sequences from all MCU movies. Let me know in the comments what yours are. Then, how I believe that this movie is actually a love letter to middle-aged fans. Now, Scott, my best buddy and Marvel Living Library, who owns every single issue of the Avengers, is going to do a shockingly deep dive into the psychology behind Dogpool. No kidding, it's really good. We'll talk about our favorite cinematic Wolverines, including a follow-up Logan deep dive. Full disclosure, I made a boo-boo. I had to go and shoot photo reference of my new Harley Quinn model and clean my phone out, and I deleted the 4K video of myself from the chat. What you're gonna see is my out-of-focus, low-res secondary camera that Scott sees. But by the juggernauts, if you're here to see this in constant 4K glory, I need you to seriously please lower your standards. I'm doing my best, and I'm not the best at what I do, and what I do isn't very nice or 4K today. Fingers crossed I'm not an idiot for next time. And again, in the words of Deadpool himself,
Let's go.
we are now up to the trash heap. Scott, Sabretooth versus Wolverine. Apparently we waited 24 years for this. Was it everything you wanted it to be?
No, we've already talked about it longer than it lasted. It was a cool moment. It didn't deserve a 5 fight scene.
I did listen to a whole bunch of interviews with the cast about Deadpool and Wolverine, and in some ways they gave me some really great insights into the movie. We were talking before about Kevin Feige and the cocaine joke.
Want to do some cocaine?
Hey, cocaine is the one thing that Feige said is off limit.
And apparently Kevin Feige did actually say, hey guys, can you tone down the cocaine references? So they went home and immediately wrote that joke. It was Kevin Feige's idea also for the anchor beings. Interesting to know who would be the 616 cinematic. I'm going to call it the 616 cinematic universe. There we go. We're talking about addendums. That is my nomenclature for that universe. Does that work for you?
Works for me.
Sweet. And then there was a really interesting question from a guy at the Screen Wars junket. He said, what do these characters have in common and what makes them different? He said, what do these characters have in common? And it was really interesting. Ryan Reynolds it's all about shame and regret. The Deadpool has incredible shame and regret in his life, and his maladaptive coping mechanism is through appropriate and inappropriate humor and now self-deprecation because he realizes the spiral that he is. Whereas Wolverine, his shame is about his berserker rage and his aggression, and his maladaptive coping mechanism is his violence and aggression.
I think the map fits the territory. The coping mechanism we really see is the drinking, but that's fairly understandable.
Anyway, and what was really interesting is that during this press junket, as Ryan Reynolds is going on this amazing tirade about the characters, Sean Levy and Hugh Jackman are just looking at him like bombs are being dropped, like they'd never heard anything like this before. Jackman dropped his own thing where he said what they have in common is that they're both outsiders. Deadpool wants to be part of the team, and Wolverine has always been pushing that team away. Reynolds went on to make a point that Wolverine is everything that Deadpool wants to be. He's a member of a team. He matters. He's respected. And Deadpool is able to deal with his shame in a way that's not destructive. That is what Wolverine sees in Deadpool. I thought there was a good character dive, and I know that moving forward for me, if I ever get the opportunity to work on either of those characters, there's absolutely 10 poles that I'm going to be leaning on. Wolverine's berserker rage, I don't know if you've ever been around people that have extreme tempers, really does distort the room. Everybody tiptoes around somebody like that. I feel it's definitely a part of Wolverine that has been swept under the rug, or it has also always been seen in a way that is convenient rather than inconvenient.
It's really been an evolution to how Logan's presented. Back in the early days, he was fractious, irritable, disrespectful to everybody as a default, aggressive as a default. Those edges have been softened as he's worked with every super team there is, often all at the same time, and clearly has developed his interpersonal skills over his years as a published character.
There is a wonderful Brian Bendis line where Spider-Man posits that because Wolverine is on all these teams, that his secret superpower is time management. So we spoke a little about the Human Torch, just so I can clear the air. I don't want anybody out there thinking that I'm in any way, shape, or form a fan of those first two Fantastic Four movies. They are fine, but I will never, ever watch them again for the rest of my life. How do you feel about those original two Fantastic Four movies?
It was an attempt, a mediocre, cowardly, unambitious attempt.
You hit the nail on the head. Those movies were so cowardly and safe. There was nothing at all interesting going on. Played everything by the numbers. They were hoping that if they did the math correctly, everyone would come to the party. And it ended up just everyone knew what the final number was going to be before they even went to see the movie. Boy, I really beat that metaphor to death. I want to jump ahead to the end credits here because as they're being driven along in the cage and the end credits really come together. And what I'm really talking about is Johnny Storm with his gargling the juggernauts juggernauts is probably the only bit I can really say from that entire speech. Apparently that was the thing that got Chris Evans into the movie. Ryan Reynolds wrote it in a day. He said, would you be in the movie? He goes, I don't know. He goes, I want you to say this. He goes, as long as that unchanges in the movie, I will be in the movie. Levy immediately knew that was going to be the end cap.
Absolutely fit the memory of movie Johnny Storm, and seeing a man we still just associate with Steve Rogers using that kind of language. It popped me. I'm not going to lie. I'm still 13 at heart.
What I really liked about it was being able to get to the end credits, and it completely changed the entire movie from that point onwards. Because when he's talking to all the other refugees, Blade and Elektra and X-23, you really feel like he is culpable for Johnny Storm's death. But in those end credits, Johnny Storm is like, and you can quote me on that. I don't care if she sucks my skin off and pops me like a zit. He literally asks for all that stuff to happen to him. And you can go back and watch those scenes again and be on Deadpool's side. That's what I really enjoyed about that end credit scene. I hadn't seen an end credit scene or mid credit scene that I felt really changed the texture of the movie but like that. This is going to be one of my favorite mid end credit sequences ever. What would be your other favorites?
Very little ever beats that visceral excitement when Nick Fury stepped out of the shadows in the first Iron Man.
Nick Fury, Director of S.H.I.E.L.D. I'm here to talk to you about the Avenger Initiative.
And it declared that Tony Stark was part of a larger universe. Nothing beats that. The shawarma scene was like a come-down laugh. Those would be my two faves.
The only other two I would have to add is actually The Incredible Hulk, where Tony Stark turns up at the end. I was just shocked to see Iron Man in that, because we'd seen the little flashes of the S.H.I.E.L.D. blueprints in the opening credits, and suddenly you get Tony Stark in the end, like, oh my God, Iron Man and the Hulk are in the same freaking universe. And then my absolute favorite is the end of Homecoming.
I'm Captain America, here to talk to you about one of the most valuable traits a soldier or student can have: patience.
With the Captain America PSA, let's talk about patience. And
how many more of these?
The line was delivered so perfectly by Chris Evans, where you could see Cap, who obviously wants to do this, but this is really pushing the limit of even a super soldier's endurance. That is probably my favorite, the end of Spider-Man Homecoming.
Chris Evans taking another trophy for a lap.
Oh my God, you're right. He's 2 for 2 in my books. All right, and then we get to Cassandra Nova. I've read the new X-Men, where with her debut, created by Grant Morrison, and the legendary Frank Whiteley. Emma Corrin goes by the pronouns they, them. I will do my best to remember that, and I apologize in advance if I screw that up. Scott, what do you think of Cassandra Nova?
Marvelously realized. Casting so young was inspired, avoiding the temptation to get a famous mean old lady actress like Joanna Lumley or stick a lemon up Helen Mirren's butt, or Eddie Dench's butt. Brought a real malevolence and capriciousness and presence to the role. They were fantastic. That youthful casting working against your expectations for the equivalent to Patrick Stewart or middle-aged James McAvoy really highlighted that youth was the spice that made the complete lack of empathy just work.
There was a wonderful sociopathy to the character. I loved her physical acting. I thought her gestures were incredible. I understood the whole character. There was a part of her that I felt was actually afraid of finding Charles and was quite happy when Deadpool mentions
they're trauma bragging.
I really felt that was actually quite appropriate, that she had created this echo chamber for herself that facilitated her story, that allowed her to be comfortable and not judged, which is something she implies to Wolverine later on. That if she does find Charles and have to leave the trash heap, she's going to have to change and perhaps be forced to come to terms with everything that she's done. I want to pull a later scene together where Wolverine confronts her, because I thought, again, this is the moment where having her, of all the other villains that you could have actually had there, was so impactful and meaningful when Logan delivers that speech and he says, "This is for Charles. For once, I'm going to be the man that he always dreamed that I could be." Whoa! I thought that was absolutely amazing. And the reason why she was there, and on subsequent rewatches, I still get hit by Wolverine coming to terms with that.
There aren't a lot of other obvious villain choices that could have played out the same way and exposed Wolverine's history and vulnerability and his weakness in that dramatic way. You don't get there with Sabretooth. You don't get there with the Juggernaut, with Mr. Sinister. You get there with somebody who reminds him enough of Charles to try and reach out.
And I love too, which is, if we take the helmet off, you're going to promise not to kill us. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to tear you limb from limb. What I really love is that it shows you how far gone she is, but that she actually comes as far to the party as she is able. I really enjoyed that. There wasn't a redemption, but rather just seeing the edges of him at his absolute best is able to drag her away from being her absolute worst. And that is, to me, what great superhero stories are about. And the reason why it has to be this character and that specific antagonist rather than just random villains. Loved it. Was that a crazy insight, man? Who is Professor X's brother?
Half-brother is the Juggernaut.
Which makes them half sister and brother.
Like a metaphysical version of twins. Where Arnie was all the good physical traits and Danny DeVito was all the crappy physical traits. Chuck got all the goodness and empathy and nobility, and wasn't much left for the others.
One of the things I come back to where I think this movie really doesn't care if you've seen anything before is no explanation at all of who Charles Xavier is. None. If you have not seen an X-Men movie, good luck. I guess you get the impression that Charles Xavier is Wolverine's mentor, but I don't even know if you get that until really late into the movie.
Are you getting dressed, leaving the house, driving to the theatre, plunking down your not insignificant amount of money for your ticket, and sitting there for 2.5 hours? Even if this is your first Marvel movie, you culturally have to know who the X-Men are. In the same way that everybody knows Sherlock Holmes, even if they've never read a Conan Doyle book or watched a Jeremy Rathbone film. We know classic movies because they get referenced in sitcoms and sketch comedy shows. If you don't already know on some level who Professor X is, you're not going to see this movie.
Stan Lee's mantra of every comic book is somebody's first, and they will explain that. It would just need to be a line, but at the start, where you have Colossus say, oh, Charles Xavier still won't approve your acceptance into the X-Men. Boom, there you go. Here's the head of the X-Men. Wolverine's an X-Man. You can come to that party afterwards. The really interesting thing that Cassandra Nova brings to Deadpool's arc is that whole you'll never matter idea. You made an earlier observation that the target audience of this movie is middle-aged fanboys and fangirls. They are going through their 40s and 50s now, looking back on their life and being like, you'll never matter. And there's a way in which Cassandra Nova is talking to us directly. And Deadpool is working through his own midlife crisis as we sit in our movie theater paying a ton of money to work through our own. Do you feel that there's a parallel there, that she is talking to the audience? Or am I stretching?
I don't think you're stretching at all. On my most recent watch through of the movie, I spent a lot more time reflecting on the maudlin tinges, on how much of it was saying goodbye and putting things in the past and moving on. Middle age is that tipping point where you start going to less weddings and more funerals. Once you realize you're on the precipice of that, you tend to look forward and look backwards and reevaluate priorities and re-rate your achievements. And speaking directly to the audience is certainly something that was on the writer's mind.
There is so much with art that you can bring your own intention to it, but they've been very explicit about talking about this movie is very much about legacy. And I very much feel that in that way, the Deadpool was speaking to this in the same resonant manner to Blade and Elektra and Gambit, who never even got out of the gate. How many friends do you know that are so talented but unable to actually do anything or haven't done anything yet for some reason? Whereas you have characters like Blade who never got to say goodbye in a way of his choosing, and same with Elektra. So I very much feel like that metaphor of the midlife crisis extends to these midlife superheroes. I think it's stretching, but I think it fits. What did you say before? The map fits the territory.
That was the highly obnoxious, pretentious phrase I used.
I can always count on you for those, Scott. I don't have a lot to say about the diner scene. I thought there was some great character work. It was very much a connective tissue scene that really started to set things up, that let the characters have a... Does have one of my favorite lines, I wear red so people can't see me bleed. I could see how yellow would be useful too.
It would have worked better if they'd gone with the brown and tan suit.
So one of the really interesting things I found on an interview is that Ryan Reynolds called Wolverine's suit his hair shirt, that it's something that his penance, his shame, that he wears as a punishment to himself, to wear his shame outwardly, which I thought was a really interesting idea, to justify a character like that, to get in the suit. Loved it.
Isn't it more, he finally wore the suit to honor the people that he regrets murdering in a violent rage, and those that he lost, decided to accept being an X-Man and all that entails?
Even in the upcoming scene where he talks to X-23, he talks about wearing the suit to honor them and to remind himself of them. But the reason for that is negative. It is a shame thing. It's a penance. It's a self-punishment. I think it's only when he has that confrontation with Cassandra Nova that he truly embodies what it is to wear that suit, to become the hero that X-23 says he needs to be. When he pulls on the mask later, that's the complete donning of the hero persona. When Deadpool says to him, where have you been keeping that? And he says something like, I only wear this for killing. I get the impression the last time he wore that mask was when he killed everybody. And that's why he hasn't been wearing it. And for him to pull it back on, there's an acceptance there that he's doing it for the right reasons. I think it's all a little bit of a reach, but it's also one of those things that I think it all fits the movie. One of my goals with this is people listening to this be like, hey, I want to go watch the movie again. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of things to pop into the back of your mind to see, does it fit when you watch the movie? Instead of just letting all the fun wash over you, and remember some of the ideas that were proposed to you that we've gleaned from other places or even ourselves to be able to be like, it's up to you to figure out whether any of that. I have a contentious thing to say. I don't think Dogpool needed to be in this movie. I found the dog giant waste of time. I found it was pre-apologizing for Deadpool to make him more likable when he was already plenty likable.
I think the way the ugliest dog to have ever been born contrasted with Ryan Reynolds playing pretty Ryan Reynolds and Deadpool's reaction to those aspects of himself. That contrast, I think, was deliberate and the point. Wade recognizes, empathizes with, and bonds with the ugly reflection of himself and rejects the good-natured, handsome, upright version of himself. It's showing that Wade sees himself as ugly and malformed and scrotum-lickingly self-interested, as opposed to what he could have been in. He accepts one and rejects the other. It's a point on the journey, and they're set up as a contrast to each other.
You gotta have Ryan Reynolds out of the mask for at least some of the goddamn movie. Because credit where credit is due, that dude is under tons of makeup or under the mask the entire time. I still need to watch some sort of behind the scenes to see what is under his mask that stops it from fogging up and the sweat. I did watch a really interesting video on how they get the mask to move, and it is not CGI. So there is something called lens distortion, right? The extreme version is a fisheye lens. They're able to correct fisheyes and other sorts of lenses by wrapping a 3D map over the top of it, and it shifts everything back into place. His mask isn't CGI. What they've done instead is put a 3D map on top that distorts the image. CGI would be the actual face being a 3D fully rendered image, but this is just a 3D map that morphs the film, the image itself, pushes and pulls it around to make it look like CGI, which then saved them so much money. This is Tim Miller and his brilliance, like basically creating that idea that just went forward. And I know it sounds like CGI, but it's not, because it doesn't need to be rendered, it doesn't need to be lit. You just have a basic model distorting the lens. So yeah, my point is that I get why you had to have Nicepool and Dogpool, but in a movie with this longer runtime, I didn't need the extra jokes. My contentious call.
It completely explained the Honda Odyssey.
They could have just found one, which I think would have been funnier if they
honestly would have made no more or less sense. Just because these random characters happen to come across a Honda Odyssey does not explain the Honda Odyssey.
And I think Deadpool's rant over it would have been the giant karmic kick in the juggernauts he would have needed. That would have been funny all in of itself. So then we get to the Honda Odyssey scene and the fight in that. But before the fight, he just absolutely tears strips off Deadpool. Loved it. I love the intensity to it. The fact that he brings such genuine emotion to a superhero movie is what has always elevated these sometimes very mediocre movies up several levels. The most important thing is why people are doing things. And that's why I wanted to cover why Mr. Paradox was doing what he does. If your villain isn't doing anything worthwhile, the whole reason for the hero's struggles is not worthwhile either. I felt there was no reason for the trash heap fight. It is just Wolverine being angry and murderizing a dude that he doesn't even know has a healing factor, and to just beat on him like a stress ball. And Wade is literally just defending himself.
Whereas this, when these two characters have been really pushed beyond the breaking point for both of them, Wolverine gets his educated wish line and he realizes that redemption is not going to happen. And he just feels so used. Then you have Wade being stripped down to the bone. And when he's just like, I'm going to fight you now, you realize how hurt he is. And credit to Ryan Reynolds, who can bring that under the mask through the lens distortion / CGI. Brilliant. And that fight felt so motivated and the choreography was incredible. I loved it. In fact, if I had to pick one, I would have just kicked the trash heap fight to the trash heap. Didn't need it.
I think the trash heap fight provided is the contrast between a general misunderstanding fight and I've decided I hate you enough to kill you fight. The levels of intensity, the levels of seriousness with which both opponents took it. I thought it totally appropriate that in the earlier fight, Wolverine tried to murderize the dude. He's been doing that to anybody that screwed with him since the X-Men died. That's why he's the most hated, least loved Wolverine in all of the multiverse. He is the killer that most versions of Wolverine have always struggled not to be. And so that behavior absolutely fit. Then when he's at his lowest, he goes even further down that path and tries to literally eviscerate Wade. I needed both to get the level of emotion across in the car fight. I refuse to say Honda Odyssey again.
What's crazy is they shot that entire fight in 2 days, which is bananas to me. Having done very limited fight choreography and stunt choreography before, and just how long everything goddamn takes to have that level of choreography for those stunt performers and for the crew and for everybody working to be so on point. You are witnessing one of the most well-oiled machines in action that we will never truly appreciate, but that is unbelievable to do that in 2 days. Unbelievable. What was I going to say? You
were going to plug Trojan Warrior.
I was going to plug Trojan Warrior, the terrible film that I did stunt work in. This, to me, is still my favorite Wolverine. Of all the Wolverines that Hugh Jackman has portrayed, I feel this is the most comic accurate to me. On our road to Deadpool, one of the metrics that we constantly use for every movie, every Wolverine movie, is did it have a Berserker Rage moment? And it's always this thing that we're like, oh, I want to see Wolverine go off the handle and start murderizing dudes. Not realizing the sort of person that would have to entail. This then sort of idea that I felt that this movie did with Wolverine's character, I just absolutely loved. Where would you rank it as your Wolverines?
Comics accurate, absolutely number one. In terms of my favorite Wolverine portrayal, number two. But I love Logan more than you do. I value Logan as an iteration and as a development of the character. It was not trying to be Wolverine from issue 257 or something. It was trying to tell its own story with these characters. But at the same time, it stayed true to Logan throughout and was a great Wolverine-Logan story. So that wins for me. It's a success on its own terms, in its own right, even more than this performance. But this would be number two. I'd probably have to throw Days of Future Past in with an honorable mention in terms of the Wolverine portrayal being a Wolverine that I recognize and brings levels to the character.
Days of Future Past was absolutely the tightest performance and portrayal. I had to say, an experienced director who's worked with Wolverine several times, and an actor, Hugh Jackman, who's portrayed this character, really creating an apex moment of the character at his complete peak through two different times. As I said, the only thing I regret is not seeing Dark Future Wolverine fighting Sentinel. That's all I wanted to see, especially seeing how ineffectual he was with the Bone Claws. Seeing him go to town with the metal ones would have been absolutely awesome. I realized too that thematically, Logan set up this movie. I was talking about the middle-age crisis of superheroes and the fanboys and fangirls and fan people watching this movie, suddenly looking back and being like, what is our legacy? What have we done? I think Logan answers that in some ways so much better than this movie. For all the pain he caused, for all the people he killed, for all the things that he murdered, the one thing that he put his finger on the scale and said, this one little girl, I'm going to save her. And that is the legacy that he needed. I'm just saying for anybody else out there, find that same thing to save, to make the world a slightly better place, and that's your legacy. It's all you need. It will cascade and ripple forward. We are confronted with, what have we done? What do we do? What is our legacy? Just make a little difference. Focus on one little thing and be there when it counts. I think that's what Wolverine did. He stepped up when it counts. Logan's a good movie.
Logan is a great movie, and I'm glad you're coming around on it.
Look,
Can't believe how much you trashed Logan during the review. Just absolutely ragged on it for hours, it seemed. Jason, that's not how I remember it.
Scott's trauma is self-evident right now. I love, again, one of those things. I love the character beats of Logan. I hate the plot. I hate the plot of Logan. I think it is executed in an absolutely secondhand way. It is like they poured all their energy into one thing and they didn't. James Mangold was absolutely not interested in the plot that drove everything to get there. Whereas I feel that this movie has not as high character but a much higher plot. Do I think it's a better film than Logan? No, absolutely not. Let me get that very clear. Do I think it's more enjoyable than Logan? Yes. Do I find it more rewatchable? No. Logan's really rising in my estimation too, for a lot of reasons. I just wish that plot was better. I wish Boyd Holbrook had more time to really figure out what he needed to be and create the driving push for these characters, to create the threat that just was not there for me.
You should have asked a slight British girl to give him some pointers on how to add menace in a supervillain performance.
Yes, Emma Corrin absolutely brought the menace in this. I really felt that they were able to create a level of menace that was phenomenal. I felt Cassandra Nova was absolutely an immovable object. I did not know how they were going to beat her. I really love that rising stakes where Emma Corrin she comes through the portal and I'm like, oh man, what are they going to do? Look, Logan 2 has an excellent second half. It is really that first half of the plot that lets it down for me. And I just feel without that setup, it doesn't quite close the structural gap, because the character and foreshadowing that's all set up at the start for the characters is absolutely all closed out wonderfully. And you only have to turn that cross on its side every time and you'll get instant tears from me. That's the sort of nerd softy that I am.
My eyes are as wet as the woman in the TVA watching the scene on the tiny retro screen. It's not just Logan that carries through and adds weight to this movie. It's Laura, the X-23. Her being able to tell Logan that he was always the wrong guy until he wasn't was powerful and important to Logan's character journey in this movie. Really added a level of resonance to him stepping up. And this movie wouldn't have worked without Logan having plied the road that it did.
I would have loved to see more connection between Wolverine and Laura in this movie, that a rekindling of that relationship, that Logan's final words, "Don't be what they made you," to somehow then come back onto him through her, would have really just been a Wonder Twins unite moment for me. That was the foot inside the 3-point line.
That movie's "Don't be what they made you" conclusion flies in the face of what this movie was trying to do on a meta level, where they were trying to be what the comics had made Logan, what the comics had made Deadpool. They were trying to bring more of that to the screen through the MCU lens and reflecting that back on the Fox universe and showing some highlights and some lowlights and giving us all laughs and teary memories. So I remember the good old days when superheroes were largely mediocre. Those were the days. But the characters are very much forced into being what they were previously made. It's not the genre or media transcending "don't be what they made you" message. I think it would have confused the thematics of Deadpool and Wolverine.
I agree, and I don't have a solution for it, nor am I interested in trying to create a solution. I'm just saying that if you could have somehow tied it together for Laura to reflect Logan's advice to this Wolverine in some way, I don't know what that scene would have looked like, but I think that would have been very tight.
It would have been at the fire scene, and she would have said something along the lines of, "You don't have to be what you've made yourself."
See, brilliant, thank you. And now I feel closure, even through your little band-aid. I feel good now. Thank you, Scott.
I live to give.
Holy cow, my friend. Let me know what you thought of that. What's your favorite mid and end credit sequence? Let me know in the comments. Which is your favorite cinematic Wolverine? Is Scott right about Dogpool? If you want to show your love to two fellow fans who love doing this stuff with you, please hit that like button. If you want to join the Scott and Jace Not So Cinematic universe, please hit that subscribe button. We would love to have you along for the ride. We are having an absolute blast. Please join me on twitch.tv/Jason Badower, where I'm drawing my free comic, The Last Son. There's also a Patreon where you can get monthly digital sketches. And also, please check out Joker Harley Criminal Sanity Volume 1. You can get it on Amazon, but I really hope you can go support your local comic book shop. And now, hold your horses for our final episode 5. Thank you for hanging out. We'll see you in the next video or the comments below. I love you, and thank you so much for hanging out. Really appreciate your time.
How do you hang out with your friends? Restaurants, bars, clubs, maybe over at someone's house just staring at a TV screen or just sort of hanging out. And if you sit around watching a movie, that's cool, but you're not really talking. I still, hand on my heart, believe that the best way to hang out with your friends is to play a role-playing game. Unlike a board game, role-playing games are not competitive. They are cooperative. You and your friends actually hanging out and creating stories and moments that you'll look back on and laugh at together. But the worst thing about role-playing games is getting started. There's a lot of rules, and being the games master takes a heck of a lot of preparation time each week. Enter GameMastersForHire.com. If you've always wanted to play Dungeons & Dragons, GameMastersForHire.com are experts at teaching you all the rules while taking you on an epic adventure. And if you're loving it, you can play the same character every session, who will then get more and more powerful. If you're a wannabe dungeon or game master, there's no faster way to learn and be great at it than booking a training session with GameMastersForHire.com. For the experienced D&D groups out there, if you're looking for a special birthday gift for your DM, the best gift you can give is to let them be a player for a change by booking a birthday adventure. GameMastersForHire.com will make sure the guest of honor is treated like a hero on their special day. Game Masters for Hire can also run games for anyone, from dinner parties to kids' parties, corporate events, bachelor or bachelorette nights, to ongoing campaigns every week where you play the same character every session. It's like a story that you're building with your friends. GameMastersForHire.com are available online, which is how I play with them. But if you live in the greater Los Angeles area, they can do in-person games with miniatures and sets that'll blow your mind. Please visit GameMastersForHire.com for more information. Reach out to Ollie and his team, and they'll help you out, whatever you need. And just like going out to dinner, split the cost between the lot of you. I'll even kick in. Just use my offer code BADOWER for 10% off your first game. I promise you're going to have an amazing time that you'll always remember. Thank you, GameMastersForHire.com, for sponsoring this video.
I do have to say the Labatt is very tasty for a Pilsner, without being too overwhelming also. I really like it. Well done, Canada.
Finally got something right.
Beer, so. Deadpool was here, he would totally fling his sword at the ground through your mouth. That would be him.
And he'd be right to do. I think every beer drinker likes a Pilsner. It may not be their favorite style, but you get a nice, crisp, clean Pilsner style, and most of the historical European beers skew close enough to the Pilsner method that it's pretty hard to go wrong. Despite the fact that many Canadian breweries continue to screw it up.
Just got to keep putting the boot in to these lovely people.
Well, no one's complained yet, but that's also very Canadian.